what you think about Lady Gaga.
Some wondered if influence was plain out copying.
It feels reductive.
Is that good?
Look it up.
They were icons, not just voices on a stage, but storms in human form. They could light up an arena with a single note and burn bridges just as fast. For decades, Madonna kept her composure wrapped in the polished armor of a consummate performer, smiling through headlines, ignoring the whispers, and letting her work speak louder than her wounds. But even steel can remember every strike it has taken. Now, at 66, the Queen of Pop has chosen to lay her cards on the table, shattering the poise that defined her silence. Known for reinventing herself more times than the music industry could keep up with, she was never afraid of provocation, of challenging the boundaries of taste, of owning the crown, no matter how many tried to snatch it away. Yet behind the high-energy tours that grossed hundreds of millions behind the Guinness records and platinum plaques, there were names she carried like a scar, names that turned collaboration into conflict award nights, into battles, and backstage corridors into minefields. She doesn't speak of them lightly. For Madonna, music was never just melody. It was ideology, a war of authenticity against image of discipline against chaos. And when someone crossed that invisible line with arrogance, betrayal, or the casual cruelty of the powerful, she didn't forget. For years, she buried those clashes under a layer of elegance, allowing the public to guess, but never confirm. Until now. Her voice still sharp, as the day she sang like a prayer, no longer softens the edges. She calls them out, not in rage, but in the icy clarity of someone who has seen the game from the inside and knows exactly where the rot lies. The reasons are harsher than a feud. They are verdicts, and the 6 names she's about to reveal will feel like the moment the spotlight cuts through the fog, exposing every flaw it touches. Lady Gaga. For years, the media painted them as mirror images, 2 blonde provocateurs redefining pop music for their respective generations. But to Madonna, that reflection was a distortion she could never accept. The tension began quietly in 2011, when Born This Way exploded onto the charts, debuting at #1 in over 20 countries and selling more than 1 million copies in its first week. Critics and fans alike noticed its uncanny resemblance to Madonna's 1989 hit Express Yourself. In interviews, Madonna did not hide her thoughts, calling it reductive, a single word, delivered with surgical precision, slicing through the polite facade of pop diplomacy. Behind the cameras, the sting went deeper. She felt the song was not just inspired, but lifted a bold borrowing without acknowledgement. In her eyes, pop was a battlefield of originality, and Gaga had crossed into enemy territory. The feud simmered over award show seasons, with both women orbiting the same stages. There was the infamous 2012 moment on Madonna's MDNA tour when she mashed Express Yourself into Born This Way Live, segueing into She's Not Me, a medley many saw as a pointed declaration of war. The audience roared. Gaga stayed silent. But the rift was not only about melody and lyrics. Madonna saw in Gaga an emblem of a new pop era obsessed with spectacle for spectacle's sake. The meat dress, the arrival in an egg at the Grammys, a theater of attention that, in Madonna's view, overshadowed the music itself. It was a philosophy clash, artistry as performance versus artistry as provocation with purpose. Over the years, they shared moments of public civility. In 2019, a photo of them embracing backstage at the Oscars suggested the ice might be melting. But those close to Madonna knew the smile was polite, not forgiving. She never named Gaga in interviews when speaking of her 6, but the weight of their history hung heavy. To Madonna, Gaga represented a challenge not just to her influence, but to the code she had lived by, a code where influence was earned through reinvention, not replication. In the quiet, after the applause, Madonna once confided to a friend that respect was her currency, and once it was spent, it could never be re-earned. Gaga, she said, had spent it all in a single song. Elton John. If Lady Gaga was a wound opened by a new generation, Elton John was a scar carved over decades. Their feud began in the early 2000s, a slow-burning fire that flared in public without warning. It was at the 2004 Q Awards when Elton unprovoked tore into Madonna's Bond theme, Die Another Day, calling it the worst Bond tune ever. The remark was sharp, but Madonna kept her mask in place, offering no reply. Yet the insult lingered, a stone dropped into deep water. The rivalry deepened in 2012 when Madonna's masterpiece won the Golden Globe over Elton's Hello, Hello. Elton's husband, David Furnish, lashed out publicly, calling Madonna's win undeserved and branding her desperate. That same year, Elton doubled down during an interview, branding her a fairground stripper and accusing her of lip-syncing on tour. To Madonna, who had built her career on grueling live shows that grossed over $1.5 billion worldwide, the jab cut to the bone. It wasn't just professional rivalry, it was an ideological war. Elton stood for the polished showman of British pop tradition, a man rooted in melody and musical craft. Madonna embodied the chameleon, provocative, daring, ever-shifting. Where she saw reinvention as survival, he saw it as artifice. Where she demanded total control of her empire, he saw ego run amok. The clashes weren't confined to interviews. At industry parties, they orbited each other like opposing planets, each with their own loyal constellations. The tension was palpable even when they exchanged civilities for the cameras. And yet, beneath the snipes and the shade, there was a strange recognition, two titans of an industry that rarely allowed more than one to reign at a time. For years, reconciliation seemed impossible. Then, in April 2025, a rare thaw backstage at Saturday Night Live, Elton approached Madonna, apology in hand. Witnesses say they spoke for 20 minutes, laughing by the end, even hinting at a possible charity collaboration. But for Madonna, forgiveness did not mean forgetting. In her private ledger, Elton's name remained etched in ink. Public amends could soften the optics, but they could not erase the truth that for 2 decades he had made her legitimacy a target. And for a woman who had fought the church, the press, and entire governments to control her narrative, that was a sin she would not absolve. Cyndi Lauper. In the mid-1980s, when MTV was rewriting the rules of fame, 2 women stood at the forefront of a pop revolution. Madonna and Cyndi Lauper were marketed as opposites one, the streetwise provocateur draped in lace and crucifixes, the other, the technicolor punk sprite, singing about girls who just wanted to have fun. But the industry's narrative of rivals wasn't entirely fiction. Beneath the glitter and chart battles, there was tension that neither would publicly admit at the time. It began with the meteoric rise of Lauper's 1983 debut, She's So Unusual, which sold over 16 million copies worldwide and earned her the first-ever Grammy for Best New Artist. Madonna, still climbing toward global domination, watched as Cyndi was crowned the quirky queen of pop culture. The press fanned the flames, pitting their styles' personas, and even their feminism against each other. Every magazine cover seemed to ask who would define the decade. By 1985, the year Madonna's Like a Virgin tour shattered attendance records, and Lauper performed at Live Aid, the unspoken rivalry had turned personal. Backstage encounters were curt smiles, thin and rehearsed. Industry insiders recall Madonna bristling at comparisons, convinced that Lauper's eccentricity was performance without substance. Cindy, for her part, once hinted in an interview that Madonna wasn't her cup of tea, a comment that Madonna never forgot. The clash wasn't about who could sell more records, though Madonna's career would soon eclipse Lauper's by a staggering margin, but about authenticity. Madonna saw herself as an architect of pop culture, crafting every era with precision and purpose. Lauper's chaotic, free-spirited image struck her as calculated rebellion dressed up as sincerity. To Madonna, it was artistry without discipline, flash without fortress. Time mellowed the public narrative with Lauper praising Madonna's endurance and Madonna acknowledging Lauper's impact in interviews. Yet privately, the frost never truly thawed. Even decades later, when both women were honored for their humanitarian work, they shared the same stage but avoided eye contact, their polite applause for each other devoid of warmth. For Madonna, Cyndi Lauper remained a reminder of the one era when her dominance was not absolute, a period when the pop crown was still contested. And in the unflinching calculus of her memory, that alone was enough to keep Lauper's name on the list. Mariah Carey. The 1990s were a new battlefield for Madonna. As the grunge movement rose and hip-hop began dominating the charts, a young powerhouse named Mariah Carey stormed into the pop arena. With her 5-octave range and a debut album that sold over 15 million copies worldwide, Carey became the golden voice of the decade almost overnight. But to Madonna, who had spent the 80s redefining the rules of stardom through reinvention, choreography, and provocation, Mariah represented a very different archetype, the vocal purist elevated above the performer. Their paths crossed in the mid-90s during industry events and award shows. The tension surfaced most vividly at the 1995 MTV Video Music Awards, where both women were nominated in major categories. Backstage, a photographer asked them to pose together. Madonna reportedly smirked and declined, quipping later to a friend that she'd rather meet a tape recorder. The barb was a direct shot at Carey's pristine vocal reputation. To Madonna, music was about the total performance, not just the voice. For years, their differences played out in subtle jabs. In interviews, Madonna would praise artists who take risks, while notably excluding vocal divas from her examples. Carey, in turn, made a thinly veiled comment about some pop stars needing shock value to stay relevant. In an era when both were under constant media scrutiny for their personal lives, Madonna's relationships making tabloid headlines, Mariah's marriage to Sony executive Tommy Mottola, collapsing the rivalry, became part of a broader narrative about female competition in the industry. Madonna viewed Mariah's meteoric success as the embodiment of a music business that prized technical perfection over vision. The albums sold the awards stacked up, but Madonna saw little evolution in the artistry. She respected the voice, but not the game in her mind. Carey's brand was built on a singular talent, not the grueling reinvention that Madonna believed true longevity required. Even in later years, when both women had weathered career peaks and valleys, the frost never thawed completely. A 2015 gala saw them seated at the same table. They exchanged polite words, but witnesses noticed Madonna's eyes wander the room whenever Mariah spoke. To the public, it looked like civility. To those who knew her, it was a silent reminder some names once written in her book are never erased. Prince. Their relationship began in a place of possibility. In 1985, at the height of their fame, Madonna and Prince collaborated on the track Love Song for her 1989 album Like a Prayer. It was meant to be a fusion of two visionaries, a union of pop's reigning queen and funk's most mercurial genius. But what unfolded behind the scenes was less harmony and more a clash of empires. Prince, fiercely protective of his artistry, arrived at sessions with his own vision unwilling to bend. Madonna, equally uncompromising, bristled at the lack of creative give and take. The recording process was tense. Prince would lay down his parts and disappear for hours, leaving Madonna waiting. She, in turn, would make decisions about arrangements without consulting him. The finished track was released, but neither promoted it together. Insiders later whispered that their egos, both towering and immovable, simply could not coexist in the same creative space. Their professional friction bled into personal disdain. During the 1990s, Prince reportedly referred to Madonna as someone more concerned with image than music, a comment that cut deep for an artist who prided herself on controlling every aspect of her sound and message. Madonna, never one to leave a shot unanswered, told Rolling Stone in 1994 that working with Prince was like two people who both want to drive and no one wants to be the passenger. The rivalry intensified in subtle but public ways. At the 1991 Academy Awards, when both performed separately, Madonna's elaborate staging was seen by some as a deliberate contrast to Prince's stripped-down set. Years later, at a private industry dinner, the two reportedly sat at opposite ends of the table, speaking only through intermediaries. Yet perhaps the deepest rift came not from artistic differences, but from philosophy. Prince's later career was marked by his rejection of the mainstream music industry. He famously changed his name to a symbol in protest against his label. Madonna, in contrast, continued to masterfully navigate the commercial machine, leveraging it to maintain her dominance. To Prince, this was compromise. To Madonna, it was strategy. Neither respected the other's approach, and neither was willing to admit that both were simply defending their own truth. When Prince died in 2016, Madonna paid tribute on stage, singing "Nothing Compares to You." It was a gesture that some saw as reconciliation. But those close to her knew it was not absolution. It was respect for his legacy, separate from the man she could never work with again. Cher. In the late 1980s, Cher was already a legend, a decades-long career, an Oscar for Moonstruck, and a voice instantly recognizable across generations. Madonna, meanwhile, was ascending at an unstoppable pace, her every move sparking headlines and reshaping pop culture. The two women were icons in different lanes, yet destined to collide. Their paths first crossed at industry events, where smiles masked an undercurrent of rivalry. The first public crack appeared in 1991 when Cher, during a television interview, famously said, "There's something about her that I don't like. She's mean." The remark landed like a thrown gauntlet. Madonna, at the time on her Blonde Ambition tour, a global juggernaut grossing over $60 million, did not respond publicly. But privately, the comment was not forgotten. To her, it wasn't just shade, it was a challenge to her character from someone she considered part of the same rarefied sisterhood of survivors in the industry. Their differences were not rooted in style, both reinvented themselves endlessly, but in the way they wielded power. Cher's reinventions felt organic, shaped by life stages and personal growth. Madonna's were calculated campaigns, meticulously timed to dominate the cultural conversation. To Cher, this came across as manipulative. To Madonna, it was simply mastery of her craft. Through the 1990s, their public interactions were sparse but telling. At the 1999 VH1 Divas Live concert, Cher and Madonna shared the stage for a finale number. Viewers saw camaraderie. Those backstage saw two performers negotiating every shared spotlight down to the inch. Later in 2002, Cher made another pointed comment, in an interview saying she respected Madonna's career, but wouldn't want to be her. Madonna's response was silence, not the silence of indifference, but of someone filing the slight away for later. Her philosophy had always been that public feuds were a currency she could spend when it suited her. With Cher, she chose to bank it, letting the history accumulate like interest. Even in recent years, when the two appeared to soften toward each other on social media, the undercurrent remained. Madonna understood Cher's endurance, admired it even. But she also knew Cher had once very publicly questioned her humanity. For Madonna, whose career had been a fight for control over her own image, that was a transgression that couldn't be erased by a friendly tweet or a joint photo op. And so Cher's name stayed in the quiet ledger. Madonna carried a reminder that in the rare air of music's upper echelon, even queens keep score. For Madonna, the list was never about petty grudges or tabloid fuel. It was a map of fault lines, the places where her values collided with others, where art and ego clashed, where the definition of authenticity was contested under the glare of the spotlight. 6 names each a chapter in a larger story about what it means to survive and to lead in an industry that rewards both brilliance and betrayal in equal measure. Across 4 decades, she navigated wars, both public and private, lyrical accusations, biting interviews, backstage snubs, and collaborations that dissolved into creative stalemates. Each encounter left a mark. To outsiders, these might look like rivalries born of vanity. But for Madonna, they were battles for the integrity of her craft. She believed reinvention was not a costume change, but an act of survival. That power was not something given, but taken and defended. And in her eyes, those on her list had in one way or another crossed the invisible lines she had drawn to protect that belief. In the quiet of reflection, she does not deny their talent, their influence, or their place in music history. She acknowledges that some of them shaped her even in opposition. Yet she also knows that the culture they helped create, sometimes recklessly, is not the one she fought for. In her world, performance is not just noise, and fame is not a currency to be spent on stunts. It is an altar built from discipline, risk, and an unflinching will to stay true to the story you tell. Now, at 66, she stands not as the provocateur of her youth, but as its last custodian. The industry has changed, louder, faster, more disposable, but her principles remain. She does not shout back at the past. She simply names it, then moves on. In the end, the list is less about hate than it is about boundaries. And for Madonna, boundaries are not walls. They are the final line she refuses to let anyone cross.